ecosystem.
Hi Priyanka, hi Suresh.
Hi.
Budget presented last afternoon looks very interesting, yeah? Looking forward to listening as to how the proposals will reshape the road to recovery of our economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see how these proposals will be shaped and implemented in the context of the overall economic recovery.
I agree. It will be interesting to dig deeper into this. I think panel discussion is going to be interesting.
Yeah. I think our clients have started coming in. Shall we go join them for the discussion?
Yeah, let's go.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very good morning to all of you. Our esteemed clients, our guests, a very warm welcome to the Budget Analysis 2024 done by KPMG with the theme Road to Recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure to have all of you here today, bright and early. So I'm glad that you have come here. I hope you have enjoyed our hospitality, that you have had a nice filling breakfast, and you are ready, ladies and gentlemen, to see what the budget highlights are and what indeed is the road to recovery for 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the first time in 4 years that KPMG is having a live event. All of you know of the challenges that we faced, that Sri Lanka faced as a whole over the last 4 years. So it's wonderful to have all of you here face to face so that we can present, meet, and understand your requirements and also give you our expert views face to face this morning. It's also very poignant for us that this is the first time that we are having a live event of this nature after the firm marked 125 years of its presence in Sri Lanka. So it is indeed an honor to have all of you here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to tell you that you can download the KPMG Budget Analysis book onto your phones or devices just by scanning the QR code on your table. So please do go ahead. That has detailed insights into our review. Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, The budget speech was presented by the President, Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe, in the Parliament. And today, our experts have been working through the night, I can assure you, to present the insights, to analyze what was presented and what we hope to be significant steps in the road to recovery for 2024 for Sri Lanka as a whole. And as corporate leaders, ladies and gentlemen, your presence is not just important, it is vital. And your understanding of this is vital for the road to recovery to actually come into fruition. So thank you once again for being here. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our managing partner, Mr. Priyanka Jayatilaka, who will be delivering the welcome speech. This event holds particular significance as it's our first client event since Mr. Jayatilaka assumed the role of managing partner in April 2023. Please join me in welcoming him on stage for his inaugural address to welcome you all.
Thank you, Nupini. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct honor and privilege to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Nishan Dimel, our keynote speaker, and our distinguished panelists, and each and every one of you here at the 2024 KPMG budget analysis. As we gather here this morning, we are surrounded by a wealth of experience, expertise, and shared commitment to understand and dive deep into the budget proposals presented by President Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Minister of Finance at the Parliament last afternoon. The dynamics of our country's financial roadmap are pivotal to all of us as we are focusing on the road to recovery, both in our business and personal capacities. This session, filled with convergence of diverse perspectives and insightful discussions, reflects KPMG's commitment to providing not just service, but value, not just advice, but comprehensive understanding to you, our valued clients. Throughout our sessions this morning, we aim to analyze and understand the implications, challenges, and opportunities that 2024 budget presents. I encourage you all to actively participate and share your insights and engage in thought-provoking discussions during the panel discussion. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for being a part of this remarkable event, which is the first physical client event KPMG is hosting after a lapse of a few years. As a firm that has just celebrated 125 years of presence in Sri Lanka, I take this opportunity to thank you, our valued clients, for supporting KPMG all these years. Your presence here today is deeply appreciated, and I'm genuinely looking forward to the enlightening discourse and shared insights that will unfold. Wish you a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe all of you have been warmly welcomed, but I hope you all know that you are an integral part of our events as our esteemed clients and guests. And you are the reason, ladies and gentlemen, that this event is always a success. So thank you very much for being here. Now, to view the insights of the budget speech that was presented yesterday, and to set the tone for this morning's presentation, we have our distinguished keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a renowned expert in providing analytical research and advisory services on economic, political, and legal matters, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and insights to share with us. Please join me in welcoming Executive Director, Verite Research Private Limited, Dr. Nishan Dimel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you for KPMG for organizing what looks like a fabulous event, and also for inviting me to make this first presentation on a very important topic, not just about the budget for Sri Lanka, but about Sri Lanka's road to recovery. I think this has been the pivotal question and the mantra for the last at least 1.5 years, the question of how does Sri Lanka set itself on a course, on a path to recover from the terrible economic crisis and its manifestations that we experienced 1 year ago. But of course, what we experienced were the symptoms. And in many ways, we feel that the symptoms have been mitigated by the first aid, by the suspension of debt repayments, by assistance we've received from multilateral partners and development banks. And the question before us is whether we are actually on a road to recovery or we are just managing symptoms. So I think that's really the important question. And certainly, Sri Lanka is in a position and can, with the right set of policies and actions, get on a path to recovery. Many countries have been here before, and a significant number of them have managed to carve out a path to recovery in a sustainable way. Others, of course, have not done so. So there is always a choice. There is a fork on the road, and depending on the path that Sri Lanka takes, we know that Sri Lanka can move towards recovery or move in a different direction. So the task today is to look at the budget and ask those critical questions. What is it that is critical or important in charting a path to recovery? And is Sri Lanka able to do that? And what must we do to get there? So this is not an attempt to give you the highlights or download the specific actions in the budget. I think we've all got on our WhatsApp so many different organizations telling us what the budget says. We've all read them. And I'm going to assume that you're a sophisticated audience, even though I need a clicker, I think. Even though we know that I will give you some highlights of the budget and say what it shows, but really my task today is to get beyond that into an analysis of what it takes to recover the economy or get us firmly in a sustainable road to recovery. So let's move forward with that understanding. I'm going to check where I need to click to get to the path. Okay, excellent. So let me just start by mapping out the expenditure that is set out in the budget. And of course, the title tells you what I want to focus on, but just take a look at how the expenditure is laid out. We have 2.6 trillion on interest payments. That's the most fascinating number that we must take cognizance of. Of course, the budget itself, the entire budget, including a new item that was not there in the appropriation bill, called the Bank Recapitalization Fund, that the government expects to lay out, is taking the budget to 6.9 trillion. So it's the first time the budget got above 6 trillion, and with this payment, it could get very close to 7 trillion is what it looks like. So that's a record number, but what matters is not the expenditure, but ultimately the deficit. But what is driving expenditure? And you can see that 2.6 trillion of that expenditure is going on interest payments, or expected to go on interest payments, and all other recurrent expenditure is about the same. Capital expenditure is 1.2 and bank recapitalization is 1.2. What we've seen in the budget, in addition to this macro detail, is about how it is laying out the expenditure proposals. So there are a whole bunch of proposals that are put up every year. There are 50 at least this time. They add up to 213 billion in expenditure. And if I give you a breakdown of what those proposals are, you can see that the major chunk of that, more than 133 billion of it, is going for a salary increase to the public sector, a 10,000 rupee allowance. That's how it is being laid out. And the others are distributed differently. Now, I think the salary increase to the public sector, the increase to pensioners, once you make those commitments, they're very hard to reverse. They're commitments that are likely to be met. But in general, our understanding and analysis of expenditure proposals is that most of them don't get implemented. Last year, we had 68% of the expenditure proposals actually didn't get implemented, and government is not even aware of what happened to them. A larger number didn't even get implemented. So I think it's safe not to worry too much about much of the other expenditure proposals. Budgets are often not quite designed to deliver on what is said, but I think what's important here to notice is that the pension increase, the salary increase, which are forming a large chunk of these expenditure proposals, are unlikely to be reversible. I want to structure my comments today in terms of 3 critical risks that Sri Lanka has, and end by telling you what is the solution or the instrument we have to navigate ourselves into a sustainable path and deal with these 3 risks. Risk number 1, and I can see that somebody is moving my slides for me. That's great if that happens. Yeah, is what I've already kind of signaled is the problem of revenue. Okay, so we understand that Sri Lanka had one of the lowest revenue to GDP in the world when we got to the peak of the crisis, and the solution was really to reverse that. So critical risk and the general discussion is around getting revenue to close to 15% and above. Now, revenue is a critical risk. Revenue is the solution. But I think the other risk when we talk about budgets is that the Sri Lankan budgets don't seem to be analytically laid out in terms of revenue expectations. So when I look at the next slide, what you can see is what happened last year. So it's always good to learn from the past and think forward. You saw revenue laid out in last year's budget at 3.4 trillion. Now, there are at least 10 of you in the audience, or maybe 6 or 7, who are invited to this public finance lounge that we do twice a year. And we do it for senior policymakers, decision makers in the country. And in December itself, just as the budget was ending last year, we provided them an analysis and we said, look, actually when you do the math on the revenue expectations, they don't add up. And our estimation then, as you can see, was that revenue will fall short by at least 11%. So that was the quick, fast analysis we could put together. And we said, you need to go back and revise your revenue targets or rethink your expectations, because the way the policies are laid out don't give you the kind of revenue that you need. And we also revised it a little bit later, and we came up, the 11% went to 12%, but today we are looking at a revenue shortfall of 15% in terms of outcome. And that's, of course, because some of the actions that were supposed to be done were also not done, in addition to the mathematics not working out on the revenue proposals the government had. I think the important point here is that this was already known 10 months ago. So there is no surprise in the fact that revenue is falling short. Even by last December, we very well knew that. The math said it. And yet, you had a budget. Now, I think people say we mustn't have fairy tale budgets. And by that, they mean we mustn't promise people handouts, we mustn't promise people expenditure that we can't meet with our revenue. But there's another way in which the budget is not grounded in reality. It is the mathematics of the revenue proposals actually don't work out in most cases. And you can see that there's a whole pattern historically in this. In the last 23 years now, we haven't met our revenue target even once. So I wrote an article, I think that some of you read, that's called Sri Lanka is Addicted to Missing Its Revenue Targets. This is a sort of a compulsive behavior that however much we know every year that the revenue targets are not realistic, we keep putting them in the budget and we keep missing them. So if we are intelligent, I think as a society, as corporates, as leaders, not in government, we should make that correction automatically and say what is revenue, what is the realistic level of revenue. Now, we looked at that historically, and we have a number. It seems that on average, we miss the revenue targets by between 10 and 12%, right? Last year, we missed it by 15, but it seems quite safe to think that revenue targets can be missed by 10 or 12%, and perhaps a little more when the revenue increase is quite ambitious. What I'm going to show you next is really what is the revenue increase that is required, and of course now in the budget, to meet the road to recovery. So what is the road to recovery? The road to recovery is something that we've laid out in a program we have got into with the IMF. So they've done a debt sustainability analysis. They've said, this is the path you must go. They put the guardrails, and if you stay within the guardrails, perhaps the economy won't fall off the precipice once again, and you can keep going. So that's a very, very useful anchor, at least analytically for the moment, and at the end I will talk to you about where we need to amend those guardrails. But if we look at those guardrails and say one of the goals is to keep the primary surplus at 0.8%, and that's the goal that is there. And if we are to keep the primary surplus at 0.8%, given the high amount of expenditure on interest rate, and given the extra expenditure that we are incurring, so of course, with primary surplus, we are not looking at interest rate, right? So take that out and say for all the rest, with bank capitalization, now that we have put into the mix, you require a revenue increase of 61%. Now, last year also, we wanted a revenue increase of about a little above 61%, but about 65% in the ballpark, and we missed it by 15%. But that was on the back of enormous tax increases. Introducing VAT at 15%, the pay tax coming in, withholding tax, so corporate taxes going up. So with all that, we still couldn't get to 60% in revenue increase. This year, if we are to meet this particular guardrail of keeping the primary balance, so we are forgetting about the high interest cost and still focusing only on the primary balance, you need a revenue increase of 61%. Now, the government has proposed a budget in which there is not even an attempt to meet that target. Rather, they have decided, look, let's take the bank recapitalization out of the mix, forget about that, and let's try to meet the target without bank recapitalization. One way to justify that perhaps is to say that when we recapitalize banks, we don't know the details of how that's going to be done, that if it is not the state banks that we are pumping money into, or even if it is, we will take equity. And we will sell that equity and recover the money we put in. So if there is a plan in some way to recover the capitalization into banks by selling the equity in banks, effectively you negate that cost of recapitalizing banks, and then you're back to a different revenue target. So even if that's done in the future, let's kind of park that and say that could be a potential plan. Then we are back to meeting revenue targets, a revenue target that ignores the cost of bank recapitalization, and that still requires a revenue increase of 45%. That is still quite a large jump in revenue that Sri Lanka has to achieve to even stay within the guardrails of the IMF agreed program for debt sustainability. Now, there is a huge revenue target of 45%, and there is a question of the numbers and the method by which you try to achieve it. And let me talk you through that briefly. Currently, the idea is that these revenue, 88% of the increase in revenue that the government is aiming for comes from taxes on international trade and goods and services, right, including VAT. So 84% of the increase from goods and services comes from increased VAT, and 61% of the VAT increase comes from increase in VAT on imports. So that's how the budget is laid out. There is a huge dependence on the expansion not only of VAT from 15 to 18%, but removing exemptions, reducing thresholds, and the increase in imports that is expected to happen. So a lot of things that are expected to make VAT carry the lion's share of the burden of this increase in revenue of 45, of the 45% revenue increase that is required. So this is something I think that we have to take note of as analytically, that this is how the budget is laid out. Now, there could have been other methods to get at revenue, other ways of taxing income, expanding the net, the tax net that we've talked about. I think Suresh has pointed out in the social media about budget proposals for a tax ombudsman, for other administrative improvements in taxation that were announced last year, having not been implemented. So I think there are, of course, in every budget proposals to improve tax administration. It's been there for at least a decade or more. And we haven't seen it happen, and so something needs to happen differently. But in this case, that's not even the expectation in terms of carrying the weight of the revenue increase. It is the VAT. And if I give you another picture of how VAT is supposed to come, so 59% of revenue increase, total revenue increase is expected from VAT. And you can see what the revenue increase is. This is without bank recapitalization. And you can see 720 billion increase from VAT collection alone. And then there are others. Corporate income taxes carrying 156, import duties 87. You can see how VAT is carrying much of the load that is required to get there. So if I give you one more picture of how the VAT is laid out, how VAT increases are laid out, there's an expectation that VAT on imports will increase by a multiple of 3, 221 billion to 660 billion. Total VAT collection will increase by a multiple of 2, 681 billion to 1.4 trillion. You can see the slide, I don't need to talk you through it, that basically 3 or 2 times increase in the VAT collection on different ways of looking at it. VAT on manufacturing, almost 2 times, import duty, almost 2 times, etc. So of course, import duties are separate from VAT. That also is expected to double. That the collection from import duties doubles without necessarily an increase in the rate. So expecting some kind of pent-up demand for imports to kick in at levels that have higher import duties, no doubt. But that's what the budget numbers are. I think one of the things we have to be really careful about, and I think where we can contribute to government, is really helping government get these kinds of estimations in a reasonable, rationally analytical space. Because the country is not well served by having expectations that simply is not met when we come to the next year. Now, how has the government in the past dealt with revenue falling short of expectations? That's my next slide. Usually, what the government does is it cuts the capital expenditure allocation. So you can see on the left-hand side, recurrent expenditure, on the right-hand side, capital expenditure. Recurrent expenditure, gets cut a little bit, but mostly the recurrent expenditure is mostly spent. But when you get to the right-hand side on capital expenditure, what you see is that every year there's an allocation and the actual spend is much less. And you cut the capital expenditure to compensate for the fact that you are not getting enough revenue. But this year, there's a capital expenditure squeeze, right? So you can see that last year also, we cut the capital expenditure. We cut the capital expenditure by exactly the amount that we didn't get revenue for 2023. That's how the budget balances or meets the expectations set out on deficit. But when we keep allocating less and less to capital expenditure, the space to squeeze capital expenditure to compensate for lack of revenue also becomes smaller. So let me end there by saying there is really a critical risk in Sri Lanka's revenue path. The risk is not only because of how much the revenue increase is in terms of a target, at least 45%, even if you ignore bank capitalization. But the risk is also that the methods by which we have set out to get that increase need to be investigated. They look like they're putting a huge amount of the weight on the VAT collection, and the feasibility of that needs, I think, careful analysis before we express confidence. I won't say more than that about the analysis because it is 24 hours, less than 24 hours after the budget, but that is a task I think that we should all contribute to. I'm going to get to critical risk too. I want somebody to give me a sense of time and how much time I have left so that I manage it well. Yeah. So critical risk two is the interest burden. Critical risk one is revenue, and that fed into the primary balance targets, and can we meet them? But of course, as you know, primary balance means without cost of interest. But of course, interest is a cost. It adds to deficit, adds to borrowing, and that is the second critical risk on this road to recovery. Let me show you what happened last year, and I already mentioned that. Okay, sorry, so that's critical risk two. And let me move on to the next slide. Just remind me to move slides if I don't do it, yeah. Here, what you see is what happened, what happened between the 2014, right? When we are laying out the budget, the IMF, the second bar from the top says, this is in the IMF DSA, Debt Sustainability Analysis, we had an expectation of what the capital spending would be, what the recurrent spending would be, and what the interest cost would be. Now we know that interest cost is going to be higher by 251 billion. So remember I said all 50 revenue proposals had 213 billion. Interest cost is 251 billion increase from what is already expected in the analysis already done and planned for economic recovery. How much more can we increase public sector salaries if only our interest costs were lower is another way of asking that question. But of course, how does the budget deal with that? It takes it all off capital expenditure. So there was expectation that capital expenditure will be higher, so you've cut the capital expenditure, and of course you've left the bank recapitalization as a separate piece that's now an add-on to the budget deficit. But as I said, let's ignore that. Let's assume there's a way of recovering that later. But a 251 billion increase in the cost of interest is adding to that risk. That means that the way we planned our interest cost pathway is currently not working out. Even as soon as 2024, we are seeing that there's a very significant deviation. I'll tell you why this is a much larger problem than we might imagine. It's because Sri Lanka has a very, very odd situation in the world. That we are the country with the largest interest cost to government revenue in the world, and by far. Last year, we had a 72% interest burden to interest cost to revenue, not last year, in 2021. I'll show you later how this increased, but you can see that Zambia is the next highest with 27%, Malawi with 25%. I must say this World Bank data set doesn't have some countries, like we can't find Argentina in it because they're in debt restructuring and they don't seem to be paying their interest. But really, looking at this, you immediately realize that Sri Lanka can't expect to occupy the top position in terms of interest cost to government revenue and get on a road to recovery at the same time. Something has to change, because on this analysis, Sri Lanka is the most at risk in the world for having difficulty in managing its debt. Because the debt, it's not about the quantity of debt. It is, as I've said repeatedly in the past, it's about the cost of debt. So you can grow your way out of debt, but if the cost of debt is growing so much or exponentially, that's when the debt begins to snowball. Now, here's another piece of news. When interest costs were actually lower, and you will see it later, I'm sorry if this is going to get too analytical for you, that between 2015 to 19, almost 90%, 89.8% of the increase in debt was just to pay interest. And then interest on having to borrow to pay interest. So we had a situation already when actually interest levels were much lower, that the debt was snowballing because of the cost of servicing interest, right? There was a 42% increase in debt during those 5 years, but almost 90% of that increase in debt was simply to service interest and the cost of servicing the interest on paying that interest, because you had to borrow to pay that interest. So the snowballing problem was already there because of the cost of interest, and if we can't get the interest cost to revenue down, that's a critical risk in the path to recovery. And now I'll show you the historical data on that. So in that 2015 to 19 period, when interest was occupying 90% of the cost, or 90% of the explanation for increasing in debt, actually the revenue to interest to revenue was much lower. It was in the 40s. After 2020, it went to the 70s. And it has stayed in the 70s even in 2023. The target was to have it to be 67% of interest to revenue. It went to 77. And the target for this year is to bring it down to 64 on the current budget, though the IMF guidelines would have it at 54, or the road to recovery that we planned with the IMF has it at 54. If we miss it by 15%, like we did last year, it'll go to 76. You can see why interest cost is going to be the critical issue for Sri Lanka. So there are two ways to deal with that. The interest levels can come down and revenue can go up, but how much can revenue go up? Maybe revenue goes up 25% in nominal, in terms of percentage of GDP, or even if revenue goes up 45%, we are still significant distance away from losing the first place position in the world in terms of being the country with the highest interest burden to government revenue. Something needs to be fixed in that department. I'm going to move to critical risk 3 for Sri Lanka. And that is about ultimately putting all this together to, is our debt going to be sustainable? Okay? So we've hit a debt sustainability crisis, so we think we're on a path to recovery. And I'm just going to show you, and of course the other part of that recovery is not only you can increase your revenue, you can reduce your interest rates, and you can also grow your economy, right? So we of course missed our growth targets a little bit this year. IMF program said -3, we are now saying -3.6, it could even be worse when it finally comes out. We're trying to compensate and say we'll get back on the path with a positive 1.8% growth next year, which is more than the IMF target has been. But there is a little bit of a problem in the way these things are laid out in the budget. You know, you say you have a medium-term macroeconomic framework because the real GDP growth is 1.8, but the implied nominal GDP growth, when you look at the numbers, is 11.5, which means that implied GDP deflator, that is the price of all goods and inputs in the economy, is set to increase at 9.5%, whereas you also have an independent central bank with an inflation target of 5%. So once again, we have a problem because one of the ways in which, other ways that you bring debt under control is by inflating it away. And of course, that impacts domestic debt, not foreign debt, because as you run inflation, you also run depreciation on your exchange rate, and that doesn't really help your external debt. It sort of neutralizes it. But if you're looking at debt to GDP ratio, if you're having a high level of inflation, then in nominal terms, the GDP grows faster, but your debt remains the same, and you kind of bring it under control. If most debt is domestic debt, that is one way to do it, though not a very kind way to do it in terms of social consequences. But here we have a problem because these numbers need to be made to add up, because if the central bank maintains its goal of getting inflation at 5%, that means the deflator might come down, nominal GDP doesn't go up as much. That means there is not the same consequence on the debt sustainability, or the debt levels as a percentage of GDP don't come down as much as planned. If I quickly go through some other slides that show you what's going on with regard to the debt sustainability analysis we already have. So I have the debt sustainability target, the revised estimates, and the deviation. So there is a revenue deviation of a negative 429 billion this year from the pathway that is set out in the IMF program. And of course, we're trying to match that by a capital expenditure reduction of the same amount. So that's how we are really trying to match it, if you like, right? The next slide shows you this as a what's happening in the real sector. We have this is 2023, right? So 2023, we had a revenue deviation. Revenue fell by 429 billion. We cut capital expenditure by the same amount. We got the same budget deficit. This year, we have much less buffer in our capital expenditure, so that's a question. On the real sector, you can see that real GDP growth is 0.6 less than expected. Of course, the deflator was also lower. So the IMF expected a higher level of inflation or GDP deflator. We had a lower deflator, and therefore lower nominal GDP growth also, a negative 7.5%, less than expected. Now that's good on the consumer price front. That's not so good on the debt sustainability front. Because if your denominator doesn't grow and your numerator remains the same and your denominator grows less, your debt to GDP ratio doesn't do as well. But of course, there's some compensation on the external debt because the exchange rate also appreciated more than the IMF program had. So there's sort of a countervailing reduction in external debt burden as well. Jump to 2024, we have now revenue falling short by 335 billion. I will not read all the numbers, but you can see how primary balance will fall short, budget balance will fall short, and this is all with the bank capitalization included. But if we take the bank capitalization out, we get a different picture. Revenue is still short, budget balance is still short, but by less. And of course, capital expenditure then looks a little higher than the DSA target. So not higher, it's lower. So that means we are saving some things on capital expenditure while we're losing some on revenue in the mix. So there's already a compensating reduction in capital expenditure that has taken place. The real sector for the 2024 tells you that GDP growth, we expect it to be 0.3 above what it was last year, what was in the plan. And the inflation deflator is actually, the IMF expects 10.6. We are estimating 9.5, but as I've said, there's already a bit of a issue with the targeted consumer price inflation to be 5%. And so nominal GDP, even if this was matched, nominal GDP is growing a little less. But the question of whether we can actually match it is a question. Let me try to end now. I want to end by offering a solution, and I think we have perhaps one shot at a solution left. And this might be the only instrument available now, given that much of what has happened is water under the bridge. We are not going to fix it. But let me say this before I give this solution, that the other parts of the solution is to do better analyzed budgets that are more realistic, that we are going to achieve the targets, and we don't have to do knee-jerk responses 10 months down the road to scramble, cut capital expenditure, increase taxes in an ad hoc way. That's what happened this year. Even though we knew we were going to miss the targets, we sort of didn't accept it till, the 11th hour. So it's better to understand what is feasible, plan according to what is feasible, and try to achieve something close. Now, the reason that we need a solution is that, I've shown this slide in other forums, so I won't repeat it here. We know that from 1975 onwards, most countries that restructure debt, don't manage to get it done properly the first time. That 59% restructure more than once, and only 41% restructure once. Of course, in the last 2 decades, countries are doing a little better, but not much better. People, get out of the hole only to fall in another hole soon after, or as you say, clamber on one side of the donkey just to fall off the other. And the critical issue for Sri Lanka on a road to recovery is to avoid falling again, okay? And these are my last 2 slides. So we have currently a plan on this debt sustainability program that we've agreed with IMF, that T-bill rates will settle at 7.5% and T-bond rates will settle at 10% by end of 2026. Similarly to really we are looking for the same yield curve as 2015. And we know that even in 2015 yield curves, debt was rising exponentially, right? So it's not sort of an extremely safe place necessarily, but it's as safe as it gets. And that was the basis of the design of the current plan to recovery. And then the government said, look, we've done the math on that, and we think that we should have a haircut on external ISBs or private creditors of 30%. We are currently potentially looking at a situation, it looks like, where yields might be sticky at 400 to 500 basis points above the target rates. Maybe it's only 300 to 400 basis points, right? But we have to sort of start replanning now to say, getting interest rates down in the current climate is very hard for 2 reasons. One is, of course, global risk-free rates have skyrocketed by about 400 basis points. So that itself should tell us that Sri Lanka's rate is going to increase by 400 basis points. But secondly, Sri Lanka looks a lot riskier for everybody, not just external lenders. We don't have external market access. So that means we are depending more on local borrowing. That means there's a liquidity squeeze. There's also a sense of higher risk. So all 3 reasons, that global conditions are much more adverse, that there is a liquidity squeeze with no access to financial markets, and Sri Lanka has a much higher risk perception for everybody, means that we may need to start replanning or redoing our debt sustainability analysis on the basis of working with higher interest rates in the medium term. If we do that, then the only instrument we have left to correct and get ourselves back into debt sustainability, short of doing much more to get the revenue targets met, is to have a much larger haircut on external debt. So Sri Lanka may need to think about negotiating not a 30%, but even a 50% haircut on external debt. Now, that's not a perfectly refined number that I'm giving you. It has a lot of math behind it, but we need more data from government, which we don't have, to do this really, in a way that can be argued with the creditors. But we need the math done. We need the data to do it, and we need to be able to. The major corrective instrument we have left, because we haven't done our debt restructuring, is to actually look at a much higher haircut on ISBs. Of course, we are recapitalizing our banks, and we can manage that. And doing that can still perhaps help Sri Lanka to stay on or get back on a road to recovery. I would say currently we are probably not on that road to recovery, right? Everything you've seen about revenue burden, interest rates, the critical risks say that we are probably not right now on a road to recovery. But, it's like a train going on a path. There's one switch left. You know how trains have a switch that you can do and they change track. So we don't have too many switches left. We have one switch left. And if we take that switch, we must take it that is to take a higher haircut on the external debt. And coincidentally, that seems to fit with global data also. But you see here is that, when we look at countries that restructured their debt the first time and say how many times did they restructure, countries that restructure 4 times have a first haircut of average 23%. So on and so forth. Countries that restructure once have a first haircut of average of 63%. Countries that restructure twice have a first haircut of an average of 44%. So an average of a 50% haircut, not that that's the whole thing because it depends on the coupon rates. It's really about net present value reduction. So it's a more complicated thing, but I'm telling it to you in a simple way. But it seems like getting to that 50% gets you in that zone. That's a little better than do restructuring and perhaps, gets you with a shot at a single restructure that will be after that sustainable. And of course, the second advantage is when you do a deep restructure, everybody believes that you're safer, that you're more likely to be sustainable. It de-risks you, and that brings interest costs down. It creates a virtuous cycle. But if you restructure too little, it creates a vicious cycle because people become suspicious, uncertain, you are considered to be higher risk, and then the problem just exacerbates rather than solving itself. So here's the lesson that we must walk home with. We did a debt sustainability analysis in 2022. We did it on assumptions and data that are now significantly outdated. They're not playing out as expected. Now we know, all of us know, the government knows, I think the IMF knows, the creditors know that this debt sustainability analysis is not quite right. It is not quite going to give us a road to recovery, but somehow we are continuing on that path as if it is correct, as if we can do the numbers based on that analysis without coming up with an entirely new framework for debt sustainability based on current realities. And if we go on that path, that reminds me really of a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and you've all heard it. It's about the charge of the Light Brigade, and it says, this Light Brigade was sent into the Russian camps. It says half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, of valley of economic recovery, rode the 600, or valley of the debt sustainability analysis, forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed, ? Not though the soldiers knew. They weren't, someone had blundered. So when this order came to continue on this path, to go, charge ahead, follow the path, the soldiers knew that someone had blundered. This was a bad order. But they were soldiers, they stuck to their orders, they weren't dismayed, they kept going. Theirs was not to make reply, theirs was not to reason why, theirs was but to do and die into the valley of death road, the 600. Now, it was the charge of the Light Brigade was very heroic, but it won't be the same for Sri Lanka. To charge ahead on a debt sustainability analysis that is outdated will not lead to a recovery. We still have some moments left before we do the debt restructuring. If we redo our analysis, we have an appropriately larger haircut on our debt. Sri Lanka can still switch back and be on the road to recovery, and that, I think, is where all our efforts should be concentrated. Thank you very much.
Dr. DeMille, may I ask you to come back on stage, please? And may I invite our managing partner, Mr. Priyanka Jayatillaka? This is a token of our appreciation. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with those insights and the view of the critical risks that Dr. DeMille has presented, it seems like the road to recovery has many stops, many turns, and is definitely a winding road. Thank you very much for those analysis and predictions, ladies and gentlemen. And I hope that all of us can pull together to make sure that we journey not like the Light Brigade, but on a proper path on the road to recovery. And before we move on to our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already done so, you can scan the QR code and that is on your table, and you will have the KPMG budget analysis book available for you on your devices. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the partner tax and regulatory services for KPMG. You've all seen him, you all know him very well. And he is someone with a lot of analysis, insights, and experience for the national budget, and over the past few years has provided and has spearheaded KPMG's efforts in analyzing and providing the concessions and various other, should I say, options that are provided in the national budgets. So we're in for a comprehensive and enlightening overview from our very own tax partner. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Partner Tax and Regulatory Services, Mr. Suresh Arai Pereira, who will present the highlights.
Good morning, everyone. Right, the tax time. Right, the good news is there are no new taxes that have been introduced. No wealth tax, no property tax, no inheritance tax, no gift tax. And I expected there will be stamp duty in preparation of this list of taxes that I mentioned. And the good news is, okay, there are no stamp duty increases also. Right, now, then what do I want to speak about? In this budget proposals, we actually don't have much to speak about with regard to taxes. This set of budget proposals is concentrating on collection of the taxes from the existing taxes that are in operation. But this is not a guarantee that there will be taxes after the budget. Right? Right, so having said that, I will take you all through the few proposals that are in the budget, right? So, as I said, this is a budget that is focusing on collection of the taxes. Powers have been given to the Commissioner General, and new measures have been introduced to make the life easy for the tax officers to collect the taxes. And in the budget proposal, normally you get revenue proposals. From this tax, this amount to be collected, and from this VAT, this amount to be collected. And in this set of data that we have in our hand, There is no such breakup. So the only relevant part that I can see from the budget proposal is the three numbers that are there, which Nishan in detail analyzed, so I will not go into that. The taxes to be collected from the income tax, taxes on goods and services, and taxes from the external trade. So I will not go to speak on this one, Nishan covered in detail. So if you put it in a diagrammatical form, this is what is there in relation to the taxes in the budget proposal. So income tax 29%, taxes on external trade 13%, taxes on goods and services 58%. Right, so what I would do now is dwell some time with regard to the VAT, because there are two major changes with regard to the VAT that we are expecting after Christmas. In other words, we are going to have a happy Christmas. There won't be price increases before the Christmas, right? Now, as we all know, if you want to increase the quantum of taxes from VAT, there are three methods. What is that? Increase the rate, increase the tax base, the VAT base, and maneuver with the liable threshold. Now, out of these three options, two are being introduced from the 1st of Jan. Now, actually, these are not, how do I say, budget proposals. We all knew that the budget rate, the tax rate is going up to 18% from 1st of January. So it has been reiterated. So because of that, there will be tax revenue coming to the government. And increasing the VAT base also we saw in the bill that has been presented before the parliament, and still it has not been passed, or it's pending enactment. But I expect now there will be a committee stage amendment introduced to that bill. Why? In the Annexure 4, hidden in this budget speech, and Annexure 6, hidden in this budget speech, there is a reference to eliminate all the VAT exemptions, except education, health-related products, word used is products, but actually those are services, and some essential food items. So because of this, we are going to see the VAT base being included. Now, in the bill, as we all know, basically, we have a problem in our VAT system because we have something close to 300 items, goods and services, exempt from VAT, which is not correct, which leads to cascading effect in the economy when you have this number of VAT exemptions. So we have been discussing about that. We need to cut down the exemptions. Yes, I think, no, don't get angry with me, right? that is the correct methodology if you are implementing VAT in an economy. If you have too many exemptions, that's going to distort the VAT system. So in the bill that was introduced recently, from nearly 300 VAT exemptions, 250 has been identified to be taken out. So 50 exemptions have been retained. But in this budget document, there's no mercy shown in relation to those 50 exemptions also. So what it says is, other than health and education and some of the essential goods, now we have to keep in mind the essential goods are covered by special commodity levy. Special commodity levy is applicable, and on any item there is special commodity levy applicable, there is no VAT. So that's the way the law has been worded. So other than that, in relation to every other area, goods and services, VAT will be there. And that's, conceptually, that is the correct thing. Now, if you look at a country like Singapore or New Zealand, you can see less than 5 items are exempted from VAT. So now that is what we are trying to do in Sri Lanka also, but with a higher rate. Now, the concept is spread the VAT base, but keep the VAT rate down. Something is a practice that we can see in Singapore. 9% is the VAT rate. Earlier it used to be 7%. But all the sectors of the economy are covered by the VAT. Right, now, before dwelling on the base, I think we need to focus with regard to the rate. Now, as we all know, Cabinet has passed a resolution to increase the rate from 15% to 18% from 1st of January. Right, now, before going to that specific change, let's analyze the evolution of the VAT rate in Sri Lanka. VAT was introduced in 2002, and before that there was GST that was introduced at 12.5 from 1998. And from 2002, when 2002 it was renamed as VAT, there were two rates. How many of you all can remember? Standard rate used to be 20%, and there was a lower rate of 10%. And that was there from August 2002 to 31st December 2003. And thereafter, rate changed again. And you can see the way it has moved. So there were times where we had three rates also, multiple rates. Now, what the analysts say is that if you have multiple rates, the administration becomes complicated and go for single rate, right? But, so you can see at one point we had a luxury rate of 18%, which went up to 20%, and then we had for essential goods 5% rate. Now that 5% rate was taken out, and that was that basket of goods have been subject to special commodity levy. That is the situation now that we have in Sri Lanka. Right, now what I want to highlight here is, when you see from 2002 to 2023, how many times the rate has changed? You can see if you include 12.5 GST rate also, 12 times the rate has changed. Now, there are problems when you go for frequent rate changes. What's the problem that is with regard to frequent rate changes? That leads to inflation. How does that happen? Every time the VAT rate is changed, the traders, suppliers of goods and services, change the prices of the goods and services also, not corresponding to the rate hike, not corresponding to the rate change, but they keep try to make a hidden profit and then blame the policymaker. Because of that, we have to increase the price. So that leads to inflation also. So what the analysts say is that once a rate is introduced, that should not be changed frequently. Normally, when you introduce VAT in an economy, in a country, there is a price escalation at the marketplace initially, but thereafter it gets stabilized. Now, what has happened in Sri Lanka is our policymakers do not understand this fundamental principle. So that's why we have this kind of frequent rate changes taking place. Now, if you look at 2022, only in 2022, the rate changed 3 times. Rate changed 3 times. In New Zealand, from the time the VAT was introduced in 1986, for 38 years, the rate has changed only 3 times. It started with 8%, then it went to 10 and 15%. Right, so that's the point I have to highlight here. So we are not following the correct methodology with regard to this. Right, now, this is the other main point. So only VAT and health-related exemptions will be retained, and there's a reference to essential goods also to be exempted. So I think with regard to essential goods, the reference is the special commodity levy will be continuing. Right. So what are these exemptions? I have given a list, but I will not, the current exemption list with regard to the education and health, I won't go into the details. And right, what are the other proposals that are there with regard to the VAT? There is a reference to empower the Commissioner General to specify the format of the tax invoice. Right now, it is statutorily specified in the VAT Act. So now there's a discretion being given to the Commission General to specify the for VAT invoice format. And there is a uniform, right now there are 2 taxable periods, 1 month and 3 months, and that is to be converted into a uniform taxable period. So we don't know whether it is 1%, the 1 month period or the 3 month period, but more likely than not, it's going to be a 3 month period. And there's also a reference to introduction of point of sale machines to automate the invoicing and sales recording, something that we find in most of the developed countries to carry out real-time processing. And what is missing in the budget? We have all been talking about the SVAT removal. And the SVAT removal, after much lobbying, has been extended to 1st of April 2025. Now, if you are going to replace SVAT in 2025, there should be measures to smoothen the transition. But in this budget, we don't see any of these measures. There is no preparation for transition of the transition or the abolition of the SVAT scheme. Right, in relation when it comes to income tax, there are a few proposals again with regard to the GEMS. As we all know, there's a 2.5% withholding tax, and once that is withheld, it is an exemption, and the proposal here is to introduce a special return, and the exemption will be dependent on that special return. So if you don't file the special return, you will not be getting the exemption that is there with regard to the gems sold at an auction, right? With regard to unit trust, again, there is a provision. Certain information to be provided by a unit trust, and if those information are not provided, the unit trust will be considered not engaged in eligible business. In other words, it will be considered a company, and the company tax rules will be applicable. And with regard to the salary arrears, also there is a provision. Now, what is this? Right now, salary arrears are taken as lump sum payments, and lump sum payments are, tax on the lump sum payments are calculated using the table 2, and that results in excessive tax, because that table there is something wrong. So basically there is a proposal to rectify that as well. Then the proposals that have been introduced to strengthen the tax administration. There's a reference to introducing special penal provisions with regard to failure to submit the income tax return. Right now there's a penalty of 4 lakhs, and the details are not given, so probably that the penalty will be higher than that. And right now, the next bullet point is important as a lawyer for me. What it says is, now, as you all know, we have a 4-stage tax appellate procedure in Sri Lanka. The first 2 stages are forums where questions of fact and questions of law are resolved. So you have the right to lead evidence. But when it comes to when the 3rd stage, that is the Court of Appeal and to the Supreme Court, the jurisdiction is only for resolving questions of law, not a question of fact. You can't lead evidence in the Court of Appeal. You can't lead evidence in the Supreme Court on your behalf. Now, what is this proposal? This proposal says, if the evidence, documentary evidence has not been submitted to the Commissioner General when the Commissioner General or the Assistant Commissioner requests for the information, or at the administrative stage, administrative review stage, that means the first stage of the, I would say, the appellate procedure, if the documents have not been submitted, those documents cannot be submitted at the Tax Appeals Commission, which I think is a little bit unjustified. And there's a reference to amend the provision of the Tax Appeals Commission Act to enforce this proposal. In other words, right now the procedure is, before the Commissioner General or the admin review or the appeal before the Commissioner General, if the documents are not submitted, you can get special permission from the Tax Appeals Commission and lead that evidence. Now that is to be process to be terminated, which I think is not very correct. Now again, another interesting one going forward affecting all of us, again to strengthen the tax administration, the tax collection. When you're opening a bank account, or when you're getting approval for a building plan, or when you're registering a motor vehicle, or renewing the license, or when you are registering a land, that means the deed, or the title to the land. So there are two areas in Sri Lanka where you register the deed, under the registration of documents ordinance, and in certain areas, it's the registration of title. When that's being done, you have to submit a copy of your TIN registration. You have to submit your copy of TIN registration. So this is to basically to make the to ease the collection process or to enhance the widen the tax base. Permission introduced for that. So this budget is all about tax collection. Right. When you look at the tax to GDP, with the comparison with the IMF target that's given, in 2002, we were as low as 7.3. I don't think we have reached a lower number than 7.3 in the history. So it's go up to 12.1 according to this set of budget proposal. Right, my last slide, or last few slides. Right, you can see the tax revenue composition in Sri Lanka from 2022, according to 2022 numbers. So what is the highest tax there? Income tax, followed by VAT and excise duty. But Nishan pointed out, what is the, which tax brings the highest revenue to the Commissioner General? VAT. Now here it seems it's the income tax. Why is that? Not that the VAT, the income tax collection has gone up. That is because of two reasons. In 2022, there was a collection of surcharge tax and collection of tax amnesty. Under the tax amnesty, the taxes were collected have all been accumulated under the income tax. That's why the income tax shows a higher percentage compared to the VAT. Right. As I said, very difficult presentation for me because there were not many budget proposals to discuss. But during the panel discussion time, I'm sure you'll be asking a lot of questions from me. Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Thank you for those insights, ladies and gentlemen. Definitely many insights that Suresh has provided, and based on the back of our keynote speech and Suresh's presentation, we'd now like to have a panel discussion. We have a number of eminent panelists who can provide their expertise, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for you to present your questions, if any, for our eminent panel. To start off, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel discussion. He's none other than the Head of Audit and Chief Operating Officer of KPMG, our very own Mr. Suren Rajakaria, who I'd like to invite on stage. He brings with him a wealth of experience and expertise to guide this discussion throughout the session. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen. It's also my privilege to introduce our panelists. Dr. Kapila Senanayake, Director General, Fiscal Policy Department of the Ministry of Finance. Sir, please join Mr. Rajakaria on stage. Mr. Jonathan Allis, Chief Executive Officer, Hatton National Bank PLC. Ms. Shiromal Kure, Chairman, Managing Director of Jetwing Travels Private Limited. Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Managing Director, Sunshine Holdings PLC. Mr. Prasanjit Vijayathilaka, Executive Director, Investment Promotion at the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka. Mr. Hasitha Premaratna, Managing Director, Brandix Lanka Limited. Mr. Indika Tisoiza, Chairman, Federation of Information Technology Industry. And our eighth panelist, Mr. Reyes Mueller, Commission Member, Colombo Port City Economic Commission, Chairman, Sri Lanka Telecom, and of course, our very own alumni and former managing partner. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for our esteemed panelists. We'd like Mr. Suresh Rai Pereira, the Principal and Head of Tax and Regulatory, to join our panel as well for his insights. Thank you. Mr. Rajakario, over to you.
Just can you hear? Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here early in the morning. Welcome to the budget discussion. Before I start off, can we give a round of applause to the stellar panel we got lined up? And for this wonderful event organized by KPMG. I mean, I virtually see a full house. To start off, let me just give brief introductions on what we want to discuss. Nishan has already presented the macro and fiscal policies and the road to recovery and the framework and all that. So we don't expect to repeat any of those. Okay, that's one. Suresh has done a brief outline of the analysis and talked a lot about VAT. So we won't discuss VAT also in the next 1 hour we have. My request to the panelists is to try and focus the budget, the proposals, towards impact for companies and businesses in Sri Lanka. Because lots of our clients here run businesses. They know what's happened in the past and the budget proposals and what percentage has been implemented and what has not been implemented. That's not our key focus of the discussion, but what can we do about what has been proposed? The second one is, how will the budget impact the country's economic trajectory? Now that's what we have titled as Road to Recovery. Despite some issues about whether we will get there, whether we will achieve or whether we will not get there, we still have to work towards it. And that's why we have invited corporate leaders to the panel, and our C-level forum here are very keen to understand your views on this. Listening to the proposals, obviously I'm reminded of something Winston Churchill said, and we won't talk about it after I mention it today now. He said, for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift it himself. So we all understand that. Okay, we are not going to get back to that sort of discussion. I mean, why did we stand in the bucket or how we try to lift it? That's not our focus today. Irrespective of whether we are trying to lift ourselves out or not, we will try to avoid repeating all the budget announcements, but we are going to discuss impact to identified sectors. So we got sector specialists here. I also have note to say Vish and Hasita has to leave at some point in time, but we will get to your questions. First, let me first try to invite our Dr. Kapila Senanayaka, we switch seats, okay, to talk about, something about all these proposals. Understanding of planned government expenditures and appropriations and their planned outcome is as important as revenue targets. We've heard that from Nishan's presentations, because it provides strategic information for corporates to formulate their plans. How would this budget help formulate plans for the corporates? Especially, which one of the things was the planned reduction in capital expenditure. Now that's not a good thing. When companies are stuck with budget considerations, if they start reducing their capital expenditure and reducing, investing in what they have to do, that sort of causes a long-term issue. Okay, so despite that, for specifically exports, manufacturing, and other sectors, how would this budget, help corporates who are here formulate their strategies and plans for the next 1 year, Kapil? Over to you. Tap on it. Okay. I think it's.
Thank you, brother.
It's working.
Action.
Yeah.
Like to inviting us forum, especially of farsight in budget. So that was initiated last year budget. It also has a medium-term perspective. So this is a connection to that as well. So you can see there are some proposals connected to budget 2023 as well. So here I listened some of the presentations in terms of fiscal management as well as the tax policies. So here we are in a really difficult situation as they emphasize. So now here we have to speak about the future. That's very important. So fiscal discipline is must for the business to run. So we have to cooperate business to run as well. So with regard, so in the government side, we have to have a fiscal discipline. To do that, so we have now an IMF program. The main parameter is to ensure primary balance target. Well, this year it is minus 0.7% of GDP, but next year is plus 0.8%. You can imagine what would the revenue look like. So it's about 12.1% of GDP. Now we have about 10.2%. So it's about 2 percentage point rise in terms of revenue. But in terms of expenditure, so it's in Sri Lanka, there is no very big jump actually. In developing countries, about 18 to 20% of GDP. So now we have less than 20%, so we'll achieve that target in next year as well. So for that, to have a fiscal discipline, so our government framework is governed by Fiscal Responsibility Act number 3 of 2003. But you have some of the rules. One is fiscal deficit target, the other one is guarantee limit and debt target. Now we all miss all these targets up to now. That's why we are here. So to correct these mistakes, now we are formulating public financial management bill. Now almost we drafted. That is to ensure fiscal discipline in the country with accountability and responsibility. That's really must for the business, the functioning and also to grow. So this will be submitted to Parliament next year, March. So I think there we have room to curtail some of the expenditure as well as the revenue management as well. In addition, we have introduced Parliament Budget Office, and also now we are going to establish Debt Management Office at the Treasury, so which will also help to improve the institutional strength in the country. So that's very important. With regard to Suren's questions about the capital reduction, but that's not the correct number. So we have increased capital expenditure next year, 4% of GDP. That is about 1,260 billion. So from about now 400, 600 billion. So it's a very big jump there. So when you look at our budget estimate, also you can see there are numerous projects. So it will help to the construction industry as well as the manufacturing and other industry as well. So I don't know whether I have much time. Overall, so this budget is directed to achieve this fiscal responsibility, responsibility and also the revenue-based fiscal consolidation. In addition, we have introduced some growth enhancing measures as well, especially the exports and foreign direct investment. So I think if you have more time, I can explain, but I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Kapila. I think in short or brief, what you're saying is there will be fiscal discipline and government will stick to the revenue and expenditure budget and the collection measures and hopefully won't increase some more taxes to collect more to fund the expenditures of the government. We're going to get on to something probably a little bit more interesting, hopefully, because we got only one lady on the panel, so I have to ask her a question. Shiromal representing the leisure sector as well. So the President of Sri Lanka talked about key areas for development for the future of Sri Lanka. He also presented this to Ajay Banga, the World Bank head, a couple of months ago. In that context, is there enough focus of policies or concessions or other strategies in the budget for the development of tourism, as well as to have that target of 5 million tourists in a year, and whether there is adequate infrastructure support in the country? How would you address that issue, Shiroma?
Thank you, Suren. I think one of the fundamental requirements for tourism is a stable economy, stable country with peace and harmony. So that is something we have had compared to what it was 15 months ago. Currently, we have a stable country and I think we are on a road to recovery. So that is a great thing for tourism. To answer your question about the policies, I think one of the basic things that tourism did not have in the last over 10 years was a proper branding, a proper marketing strategy, and we don't even have a PR company that is there to correct the images that are going about the country. So one of the proposals is to have a Visit Sri Lanka unit, and there is about 1 billion allocated towards that. So hopefully that will change the marketing, the PR, and the image building of the country. So that is the vision. And if that happens, I think that is a great win for tourism, because that is something we've been fighting for. And without any promotion, if tourism has improved to this extent, with the proper positioning of the country, because we have a naturally pretty destination, it needs marketing. So if that is done effectively, we can easily reach the targets that are looked at. So with regards to 5 million tourists, personally, I would rather look at value than numbers. But the budget talks about 5 million. It would have been better if we said, say, 5% or 10% of the GDP. It is something that we can actually target and achieve for. So now that we are looking at the numbers, maybe we should look at how we can increase the spend of the tourists in the country. Because once we get the 5 million, we need to make them spend money in the country. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to do various other entertainment and any other options that are available. So to get them to spend more money in the country. The other question is so other policies that have been enacted, like recommencing the road network, the motorway to Kandy, investment in artificial intelligence, digitalizing the economy, increasing universities, all that will have virtually a direct impact on tourism as well. So I think overall, it is good for tourism and we are quite hopeful. Thanks.
I think that's good news, I suppose, and there is also a proposal for medical tourism. So obviously there is related industries, whoever is here can invest in them and benefit from the growth in the tourism sector. We're similar to what the President said. He also identified 2 other key areas of development for the future of Sri Lanka in the same discussion with the World Bank guy. In that context, is there enough focus on policies and concessions in the budget for the development of the 2 things, food security and agriculture modernization, and renewable energy were the other 2 sectors? What do you think? What are the opportunities for corporates in those 2 sectors?
Thank you, Suren, and thank you, KPMG, for having me here this morning. Yeah, the budget talks a lot about policies for agriculture. It talks about improving the dairy sector, the fisheries sector, improving the yields in paddy, etc. But unfortunately, with VAT coming in as inputs to all this is going to have a serious difficulty in, increasing the already high cost of inputs into the agriculture sector. So that's going to create a challenge. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more emphasis on post-harvest management, which has been an issue in Sri Lanka. We waste a good 40% after post-harvest. I know there is a gift of our neighboring country still waiting to be completed in Dambulla, which is a cold room which started some 5 years ago, which is halfway finished. So I think those are the areas in the agriculture that we need to have effort, maybe more digital technology into the agricultural sector would have been helped. In terms of renewable energy, I think there is serious emphasis on renewable energy. The current ministry is working quite hard, and I think that will continue to be there because of the issues in energy costs in Sri Lanka. But as for companies that are in agriculture, I think because of the VAT increase, there will be challenges in input costs, which we cannot pass on to the consumer, especially things like tea, where I don't think it's not clear whether tea is exempt at the purchase of the auction. Still very confusing as to say it is. So we'll wait for gurus like Suresh to bring some clarity to that soon.
Yeah, but agriculture also has two other problems, right? You talked a little bit about productivity and trying to improve productivity through digitalization or whatever the plans in. And then another thing is low land use, which may be linked to low contribution to GDP. There is some proposals about 10 billion being allocated for development of unallocated, I don't know, estates, abandoned estates and lands and stuff like that. How would that work for corporates like yourselves and people here to benefit from those things?
So land use has always been an issue, and while President specifically has said that he would release state land and other lands in other areas close to 400,000 hectares, it says. But the issue, I think, the corporates that have been able to get some land, it's, getting into those lands because of the issues with villages already settled down there is always a huge challenge. And the various departments involved, such as forestry, defense, etc., who is already occupying those lands, it has taken so much more time to get, access to those lands. So I think those of us who have had access have had to turn back because the inability to go and get something done there. And again, the productivity, and especially with the import ban on a lot of the agricultural input equipment until recently, we have not been able to import. Again, 18% VAT on all those imports are going to make it even more challenging. I seem to be repeating it again, but everything is going to get only more challenging into these input costs.
I know, we were not supposed to discuss about VAT. I mean, that was, because Suresh has said everything about VAT has to be said. But, yeah, so what actions is required by the government? I mean, if we have to put one action plan, I mean, disclosing all these strategies is well and good. There's so many pages of strategies about how to modernize agriculture, how to use the land, a 10 billion allocation here, 5 billion there. But what really has to be done? I mean, is there some concerted effort in that area?
So, like I said, I think modernization of our existing agriculture, I said post-harvest waste. If you fixed post-harvest waste, I think that will help the food security significantly. Okay. And that goes across from grains to vegetables to fruits. You take the entire array of agriculture. I would seriously spend a lot of effort and time and money on reducing our food waste. Second is to bring in new seed technology. Our quarantine system is archaic. We are not allowed to bring in newly developed seeds into this country. It takes months, years to get seed technology into this country. So there are easy fixes to do than releasing more land or doing anything else. So those would be two quick things that I can tell you that needs to be fixed.
Thank you, very useful. I also know, Hazita, you have to have another engagement and have to go. Exports have declined in the first 9 months. Everybody knows that. Nobody presented a graph because there was not much for you to say in the export sector, I understand. But industrial production, apparel, your part of it also has reduced significantly in the 9 months. Is there anything else offered in the budget other than continuing tax exemptions for the sector or having FTAs which are proposed? How do you think the export sector can, contribute towards the road to recovery and increase the contribution to GDP?
Thanks, Suresh. So thanks for having me here, first of all. So I think, like Suresh mentioned, from a tax perspective, there aren't any major proposals on the export side. In a way, it's good because at least there is some consistency to continue, right? But having said that, I think the other areas of the policy changes that have been proposed probably have some implications, which are mostly repetitions of some of the things that have been already spoken about for some time. But I'll touch mainly the priorities of our export sector and particularly looking at the apparel side as well and see how some of these proposals can actually convert into action in the future, particularly at the implementation stage. So if you look at the priorities today, I think one of the key things is the market access, right? That's number one. As a country, when we look at competing with our global competition, it's vital that we have almost equal access at least to reach different markets. So in that context, the free trade agreements matter a lot. And I think there is emphasis here to talk about free trade agreements with multiple countries. And we know that some of the ongoing agreements and as well as some of the new agreements are being currently discussed with those respective countries. I think Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia have been mentioned, but those are mostly manufacturing countries where we might struggle to really compete and export back to those countries. But India is a very important market. The Indian FTA is, I think, in negotiation. From apparel perspective, we have a challenge because the existing FTA has the limitation of only 8 million pieces that could be exported to India on a duty-free basis. So this is something that probably need to either remove the cap or increase the cap so that we can expand on that number, because there is a massive growth in the middle class of the Indian domestic market, like we all know, right? And that's an opportunity, particularly on the sports and activewear side of the apparel business, where we have the capability in Sri Lanka to make the world-class product. We have a golden opportunity there to reach the Indian domestic market and expand our base and look at growing the exports. So I think market access is very important, and out of the list of things that have been mentioned, I would say India FTA and looking at how to focus on specific strengths of Sri Lanka, niches of Sri Lanka, and then try to have adequate duty-free access will be crucial to India. Of course, it's been mentioned already, but certainly 3 years of extension into the GSP Plus into the European market is quite helpful. It's already there. I mean, nothing new in the proposals. So that's one, the market access. The second thing probably to talk about is the capacity building. Again, when we talk about capacity building, most of you know that our current Board of Investment zones are almost full, right? Very limited capacities left there. So proposing 3 to 4 new zones have been brought in the budget and some allocations, but I think it takes time for these capacities to build, and more importantly, it has been spoken about for a number of years. And some investments have been made in certain areas, but certainly we need to see whether the the action and implementation there happens fast enough, particularly focusing on the right locations for capacity building. The third priority will be newness of the product, innovation, R&D to uplift the standards of what we export today so that we can create better value. Now that applies to not only diversifying exports into other segments, but also the existing segments like apparel itself. Now in apparel, we need to diversify our base and go up in the value chain. And some of the larger companies like ourselves, we're doing a lot of work in terms of investing back to innovate and bring newness to the product, particularly investments into the R&D side. Now, there were some allocations being done towards SMEs. I think that's very important because SMEs struggle to invest on their own for these type of R&D areas. So some of these budgets that have been brought in, if they can be channeled towards R&D side and bringing the newness and the value creation of the SME sector, that will be very, very useful and very important. And more importantly, I think there has to be a channel that need to be created either through the banking system or through the Joint Apparel Association to take this into real action where the implementation will be more impactful and effective. And the fourth area I would touch on is logistics. That's a very important thing as well. Again, the inbound and the outbound logistics, because we all know speed to market is very important as an exporter to get our product fast to the export destination. There are some proposals related to the logistics, but I didn't see anything major that will push ourselves there, but that's something that anyway we need to build our base towards. So those are the four important areas, but the fifth and final, again, it's been spoken about, that's related to sustainability. That's a big word in the global consumer markets today, as you may know, how the environment, social and governance aspect, the ESG aspects are spoken about. So I believe that the green economy section that's been spoken about at length at a high level, right, probably will get actioned into a detailed plan that will position Sri Lanka as a sustainable manufacturing destination. Now that's very important, right? If we can do that, we already have a lot of stronghold in the apparel sector because we have done a lot of work on that side. We can do a lot more. But having said that, rest of the export segments can also thrive by positioning in that area. So that green economy piece, not much to talk about, Suren, in terms of specifics there, but I hope that that can be channeled and taken into the next level so that that sustainability piece will be important. So those are the 5 broad areas I see as important. So market access is 1, capacity building is 2, product upliftment and diversification and innovation side will be 3, logistics is 4, and sustainability is 5. All have been touched at a surface level, but what is important is how do we take it to action and implementation so that we can have a impactful growth in our exports. Thank you.
So the announcement on logistics hub story is obviously helpful to your sector. I understand that. The 5 zones which are being created and the FTAs. How about the implementation of those? Do you have, I mean, has this been in the making for some time, or could the results be seen in 2024?
Yeah, I think the challenge has been the implementation almost in all budgets, right? So some of these proposals have been touched at the surface level, at a policy level, but how do we really take it into action on ground is the key. And that's where, as I said before, the right mechanisms need to be looked at. Right vehicles need to be identified. So whether it's a Joint Apparel Association, it can be an important vehicle that can be used in terms of implementing some of these when it comes to apparel sector, Export Board, Export Development Board, EDP. And in that context, I think the Board of Investments coming together with some of the other institutions to have a coordination is proposed. Again, bringing a mother organization on top is what I read in the proposals, which personally I don't believe having too many layers. Too many layers means too much of bureaucracy, means too much of problems to implement, right? So I think it's important that you need to bring things together and coordinate and drive it into action. So that's something in the implementation that we would have to really look at because if you want to implement, you need to simplify, you need to cut the bureaucracy, and you need to get to the ground to get to the action.
We got some comments on those aspects from Prasanjit. Unfortunately, he might not be here to listen to them. Maybe we can send you a recording a bit later. That's the reason he's here. But before we get to him, we're going to get to banking, Jonathan. All these businesses have to be funded, right? You got to give money away. so, um, so what impact do you see on the banking sector and from any of these deferral discussions with IMF and the governance concerns they have raised? If they are not addressed by the government, there could be some implications specifically for the economy, but for the banking sector as well. And from your perspective, whether you can comment on the steps taken for macro stabilization, deficit financing with the new central bank law, where it prevents them from borrowing commercially or from the market. A commentary on fiscal stability, whether it's a precondition for the required growth, aspects, those aspects, it's rather wide. But since you're from the banking sector, I'm sure you should be able to advise us on that.
So very good morning to everyone, and I'd like to thank KPMG for having me here. Firstly, as the banking industry, without a doubt, we would want to support the resurgence, the revival of the Sri Lankan economy and the Sri Lankan corporates, SMEs, and the individuals. Now, to do this, we need to sort of remain strong, we need to remain stable, and we need to make sure that we are adequately capitalized and we are able to then play that catalytic role that is expected of us. Secondly, it's been a while in terms of, the last 4 or 5 years, if you just have a look at, continuous moratoriums, hardly any repayments coming through. We've not had a good run for a long time, and it's been kind of just in revival mode and, looking to sustain businesses and support businesses, which we have, it's been quite stressful, but we have done it very, happily. And looking forward to not only continue to support that revival, but there is still a major part of the economy that is doing well, that is generating cash flows. And we need to be in a position not only to say that we have just got enough to support those who are in real need, but also we need to step up and then start supporting those who can really generate the new cash flows, the much needed cash flows for the economy. And that will stimulate the GDP projections that are mentioned here. Now, to do that, I said at the beginning that the banks need to remain stable. And an important part of it is, will the government play its role that is required as per the IMF, the DSAs and the GFN requirements that are stipulated there. To me personally, like Nishan kind of alluded to, it's more than what IMF wants and what others want. By our own account, we should be wanting to do this for the betterment of the country and to get out of the rut that we have got ourselves into. So if you break it down to 2-3 important areas, so from the governance point of view, it's really important that all these frameworks that Kapila mentioned, the rules, the regulations, the laws are enacted fast, and there's a lot of sincerity in, bringing people to task when they deviate, and that we show a lot of sincerity in its implementation, and there's no room for further leakages like, what has been there hitherto. So the second part is we realize that, we need small government. We need a smaller government without, the government spreading its tentacles far and wide and being everywhere and really being nowhere, right? And instead, it's time to let go and bring in private enterprise to Sri Lanka. Through that, instead of having, hundreds of loss-making entities under you, you let them privatize, and then you actually let them make money, start taxing them and earning revenue. We talk of all these broad basing and bringing in new people into the tax bracket, but those are sitting right underneath their own tentacles, as it were, right? So they need to sort of do that fast so that then they can focus only on the areas that they should. As it is, there's a massive dearth of skill and quality resources available to them. Today, if you want to get a decision, there's no matter there being 20 people in a meeting or 20 in the next 5 meetings, nobody will make a decision. It at the end ends up right at the top. For the slightest thing, the CEO needs to come 5 levels down to make a decision, thereby diluting his real focus. So we need to have a very small, efficient, yes, it's difficult to keep talking of reducing costs, but that's a necessary evil. At this particular stage, we have to focus. Now, last year, when we had the problem, we realized and we actually decided to cut corners. But you got one IMF payment and people have forgotten everything, right? We think we are out of it just because, we are having a relatively okay time. But the fact is you won't come out of it for the next 5 years, right? You have to keep working on it relentlessly, 24/7, if you want to come of it. This is your last chance. And the president kept alluding to, we have got into an abyss, and he mentioned it multiple times in multiple verticals. It's only an abyss that you see. One creates another, and another creates the other, right? Like an SOE creating the abyss for, let's say, the state banks, which now need to privatize. So that being the case, again, you need to narrow it down, focus on what you can do, privatize. We mentioned about a 10%, 15% execution of the budget. We need to do much more this time around and achieve more. The procrastination must stop. We must focus on execution. We need to ensure that sometimes, let's say, Nishan did mention that, don't worry too much about the expenditure budgets, they don't get done, which is not a bad thing. But if we are doing it, don't put the cart before the horse. Make sure that the revenues are stacking up. Make sure that in parallel, then you're making your investments. I think the budget kept on mentioning that our revenues must support our current expenditure. And then if we are a good nation, the capital expenditure can actually be supported by those who truly believe in our country. What is also important, if you took Nishan's 3 crises, lack of revenue, the second being interest servicing, and the third is debt sustainability. We try to come up with a response for it. But the point is, at the end of the day, Sri Lanka does not have a future if it continues to work purely based on trying to borrow for the rest of its life and keep living, this luxurious lifestyle that we are trying to live. So we need to make sure that we become attractive as a nation to bring in FDI. Sri Lanka is the most beautiful country in the world, with the most beautiful people in the world. Then why can't we get people to put money in here? Look at the people around, the countries around us. Look at the way FDI has grown there. Look at the way people are supporting. We keep saying that our partner countries, our friendly neighbors are actually supporting, and that's true. But is it at the right scale? And then if they are not doing it, what is the reason? Do we want to be sincere and go deep and find out why are they then not coming to support us? Because the only way out is not to double and treble, but to do 10 times and 20 times the FDI that you are doing now. We still keep talking about $1 billion and $2 billion of FDI. Just look at the people around us in terms of the FDI that they do, right? So we have to focus there. It has to be a migration from debt to equity. It has to be an invitation for friendly companies and countries to come and invest in Sri Lanka, to come and make sure that there are jobs here, to do exports, to do local manufacturing, not let all our youngsters, run away to other countries and offer their services elsewhere. Let's make it happen for them in this country. And that's what we really need to do. So good governance, improving the score of making Sri Lanka a great place to do business in is good for all. It's good for the government to get it right. They were very humble yesterday in the budget when they said they never mentioned COVID. They never mentioned global recession. They only mentioned that they have got it wrong. Continuously for decades and decades. How much more must this country and the people suffer, right? Just because of a few people who have just made merry over the last few decades. What are they going to do? Where is their conscience and where are they going to take it? Right? Then you need a separate hell and a separate abyss for that, right? So you need to realize, right? The time is right. You will not get another chance. This is your final chance to put things right. And for God's sake, do that in all sincerity and seriousness. Maybe I'll pause there and
Yeah,
take
I know.
anything.
So for participants here, I think what Jonathan says in short is fiscal stability is obviously a precondition, and all what is set out in the budget needs to be achieved at some form or the other to probably get on the road to recovery. I mean, that's similar to the address with Nishan as well. Since you mentioned a little bit about SOEs and how much of money is being wasted and stuff like that, we'll put Riaz in a spot, I suppose. I mean, previously he was happily moderating and he didn't have to answer any questions. So this year we thought we'll put him in a spot and ask him something. So there's a lot of discussion about SOE reforms and significant work is being done behind the scenes, we understand. And Jonathan alluded to some of the issues in relation to SOEs. You're also chairman of one of the SOEs which are probably up for sale. I'm not sure whether it is public knowledge, right? Okay. How long would such a process take and how will it benefit the business community and the economy is my question. Because there was nothing much about SOE reforms in the budget per se. So probably 2024 has been skipped, or is there some bigger plans is the question.
Thank you, Suren. On SOE reform, as you said, I chair SLT. I can tell you that work is progressing. The EOI is out. And our target is to get SLT out of the door by the end of the first quarter. But I think we may have a little slippage to the second quarter. But work is going actively to get it out. Valuations have been done. And more importantly, we are trying to get the regulatory framework. Because it's not just a question of selling the shares off. If we are going to ensure that the president's vision of a digitalized economy is going to see fruit, you must have a level playing field for the operators so that they can compete effectively and provide the services that are required for a digitalized economy. So we are working on two fronts, getting the valuation, putting the EOI out, looking for getting the prospective bidders. And I must tell you, there is a lot of interest. And on the other side, we are also trying to get the regulatory framework also in place so that we should be able to attract the right people. It is very clear that we don't want to just give it to any fly-by-night operator. We are looking at credibility, we are looking at credentials, we are looking at deep pockets because all of these are important for at least SLT. So I think the government is, very clear and the instructions are to get it out of the door by end of the first quarter. Actually, February was the date the Excellency the President gave us, but I think we might slip a bit. But we should be able to get it out of the way. But on this point, I just want to make one. I think it's very important. SOE reform is absolutely critical. Having stepped into SLT, I realized that we had a company which was having 8 to 10 billion profit. We ended up with a 2 billion loss.
for the second half year results. I took over 2 billion loss company. So I think the problem is that it's not for lack of potential, it is lack of proper leadership and lack of proper governance. All I am doing there is just putting governance. As you know, I'm not executive, but that is already turning around, and we hope to at least close the year in the black. So governance is critical, and I think government has no business to be in the business of business. Because if you have government shares, they'll always appoint somebody as a gift, and then you'll have square pegs in round holes. So I think, to my mind, I think the government's process of privatization is the right thing to do, right? And I also want to say that people say don't sell profitable. SLT is a very good example of profitable institutions which must be sold if we want to get competitiveness in the IT field. But I just want to make one point, Suren. Everybody talks about debt sustainability. The dark horse in the race to recovery, to me, is the port city. And I'm just going to say that few minutes on that because I haven't been on the commission. The port city has had starts and stops and starts. And now that the regulations have all been published, there is a lot of prospects. I was on the roadshow in Dubai. We have already had a commitment from the Patel family, publicly announced, of a 250 million investment into the hotel sector. They are going to break ground on the tower. It's a $1.4 billion investment. They are also starting on the marina. So there is a lot of interest in Port City. And I only hope that there is consistency in the policy, because if, and I put the word if with a capital I, if we get Port City right, our sustainable problems will go away. Because if we get it right, we can clear our debt and also have a 20 billion surplus. And this is not numbers from the sky, these are numbers that have been worked out. But as I said, it remains the big if. As long as nobody comes and messes around and upsets the progress, if we get Port City right, I think all our problems will go away. I'll just stop it at that. Thank you.
So we don't have to discuss much about the budget, right? I mean, once you sell the port city and get the money in, I mean, all will be hunky-dory, and then all these people can go back and do business as usual. Banks will be all fully capitalized. But I have a question for Dr. Kapila. None of these revenue flows are in the budget, right? SOE sales, port city, is that like a cookie jar which is kept aside, or no? Plans are not really in place?
Suren, so there is no any budget line for this sales proceed?
Yeah.
Because still for 2024, that would be a then bonus.
Bonus,
so
okay.
Then we can reduce our budget deficit. I think that's the...
Okay, so that's the bonus, guys. I mean, anybody listening, just support the Port City initiative and also the SOE sales. If that goes through, I think we'll have enough inflows, and that's not included in the revenue targets of the government. I'm going to come to Indika for digital a bit later. Just give me 1 minute before that. Prasanjit, we've heard about BOI, right? Prasanjit is from the BOI, and there are reforms to facilitate investment and trade. 100 million allocated to integrate government agencies and to promote and facilitate investment. Establish a new investment or establish new investment zones controlled through this so-called infrastructure corporation. How can corporates take advantage of these measures? First question. And the second is, what would be the status of BOI once you integrate all these and a commission of some sort is formed? If you can clarify to our participants, that will be very useful.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, KPMG, for having me here. So I think I'll take your second question first. So just to elaborate on the structure. So basically what you're seeing is an amalgamation of the BOI, the EDB, the Industrial Development Board, the National Enterprise Development Authority, and SLESIC. Now, what that is effectively doing, so this is where it comes into, so that's the BOI's role there, and how this impacts the private sector, is basically what you're looking at is the entrepreneur's life cycle from infancy to, let's say, a more mature, what you would call a large local corporate. There is effective facilitation throughout that process. So starting off as a basic, I mean, if you call it a single proprietorship and so on, from that stage onwards to maybe becoming an exporter, and there from ideally growing from that point to being, let's say, somebody with a more global presence, either by way of JV or FDI. So you've got, you're creating some level of synergy and familiarity with the mechanism. And that is ideally what this commission would provide. The output verticals would be, so now on one side we have the amalgamation. On the output side, the separate vertical for the promotion piece, separate vertical for the facilitation piece. That will possibly have a two-pronged approach. So you will have the facilitation when onboarding an enterprise, as well as facilitation throughout the lifetime of the enterprise. And then there will be a third function, that is where the new zones and so on will come in. That is what you would call more of a landlord operation. And there, again, to touch on something that Hasita mentioned as well, one of the challenges, and I think Mr. Govindaswamy mentioned it as well, identifying locations for zones, and then actually creating the infrastructure and putting it out there. There is a significant gestation period. A couple of different reasons, primarily funding, and then the other is actually vesting the property and so on. So they'll be looking at a PPP model as well. We've done this somewhat successfully, I would say quite successfully. The Tulhiriya MS Fabric Park is one such example. So we will be looking at options along those lines on that third vertical. So that's a snapshot.
It will be a merged one-stop kind of.
I tend not to use that term because I'm sure there'll be quite a few in the audience who have different ways of saying, you say one more stop, just another stop, and so on. But let's call it a single window, ideally.
Okay, thank you for that. I think all this hinges on this big talk about digital economy, right? We have the budget proposal or the speech very nicely outlines a lot of stuff about green is one and digital economy one. But I have one specific question for you, Indika. So the budget is aiming for higher tax revenues and also requires the tax net to widen, that is to capture more people into the tax net. If you take India, an Aadhaar card contains a unique 12-digit number issued to every citizen in India, which is more than 1 billion. All citizens having a permanent account number, which is called a PAN card, should link it with their Aadhaar. In case a person fails to link his or her PAN with their Aadhaar card, the PAN will become inoperative, so they can't do many other transactions. In such a case, a person will not be able to furnish a tax return, intimate or quote his PAN, and shall be liable to all consequences. There will be fines as well. In your view, how can we, that is Sri Lanka, learn from such examples from India? Can we widen the tax net by digitizing our NIC connectivity or any other connectivity you can think of as to when you buy a land or customs or import or anything of that sort? Why isn't the IT agency or whoever is responsible not addressing this issue?
Yeah, good morning everybody. I think that's a very interesting question. Obviously, technology can help. I'll take a very small example, like, a couple of months back or almost a year ago, all of us stood in petrol queues, maybe weeks, days, whatever the numbers, right? But government never gave additional petrol or diesel, but we were on a queue on a Sunday and Monday, Tuesday, the queue was gone. Only thing, the difference was we introduced this QR code, right? 6 million people downloaded that QR code, and we knew exactly how many liters, what is we needed. Before the QR code, I think we had some three-wheeler drivers had more petrol in their houses than the tanks of the vehicles, right? So now when you're looking at after introducing the QR code, the number of liters given for petrol and diesel was lower than what was given before. So it gives us a streamlined process. Decisions were made using data. Data-driven decision making was done. With this, we managed to streamline it. Getting back to the question what Suren asked about the digital ID card, we have been hearing this in Sri Lanka for last 20 years, and we have failed for last 20 years to implement this. And we need to remember that we are one of the very first nations in Asia and probably one of the few, probably in the top 10 of introducing a national ID card in the world as well. But we failed for different reasons. Now, when you're looking at the list, even Suresh's presentation spoke about so many things like, when you are getting a car, revenue license, land, except I think while you're buying a lunch, you have to give your tax number, right? So why you're putting all this, we don't have a way of tracking it. And my view, all this is also will be in silos. I don't think nothing will talk to each other and you will be not able to incorporate and figure out anything. Now, baseline is we need to have a citizen identification. As India has done for 1 billion people, and there are many countries has done a similar way, which is everything is merged. From a country point of view, are we lacking technology? No. We have technology, which is homegrown technology available. If we need to get additional technology, definitely it is available across the world, starting from our big neighbor, India, which is a classic example of 1 billion implementation. But where it is first, how it is being tried to implement. Last attempt was thrown away maybe 2 months ago, which is again linked to the there's a financial support came in and the technology came in. Way it is been going to get implemented, there's a big issue. There's a battle between certain agencies within the government. How should we do that? Who's the owner of data, etc. But it never got cleared. Unfortunately, 20 years we are behind. The challenge is now we are looking at widening the tax net, etc. If I'm not mistaken, the total income tax pay community is about less than 300,000 or so. But is it the right number? We don't know, because people get away. But again, we're looking at a government has a target of achieving. But if the pool get bigger, definitely there's a possibility of percentage can come down. So we need to look at all this. So now, unless we get this ID card baseline, we'll be not able to solve many of these problems. And these databases getting isolated, databases will be not collect and will be not able to make right decisions. And I'll touch upon the digital economy a bit because digital economy is a critical factor globally. When you're looking at mature markets, contribution to the GDP from a digital economy point of view is crossing 40%. And the global average is about 20%. Sri Lanka, we are in a very bad stage, which is we are less than 5% from a digital economy contribution to the GDP. When you're looking at the economic issues we have, that's also we can consider as a major issue we have. We had a lot of initiatives for last 30 years or so on the technology digital side of the story, but nothing was consistent. And things were falling off after 3-4 years. Things get abandoned in between, government changes, minister changes, policy changes. So we had a lot of challenges. So this time what we have got together, the industry got together, specifically the IT industry, and we align with the government and we basically discuss how should be the way forward. One of the key points we asked was, yes, this is a proposal, whether it will get implemented. That's a big question mark all of us has always, right? Challenge here is this time we took a different approach. We had digital economy policies maybe last 5 years, 3. Last 5 years, 3. I was part of all 3, never got implemented. All right. But this time we said, government, yes, you part of it, but this will be led by the industry. We will take the lead. We were very clear on that. Now, with the technical support of the World Bank, we have all more or less closed it, 99% is go through the procedural process of parliamentary adoption, etc. This will talk about 6 key thrust areas. Ria spoke about the connectivity has to be there, the regulatory framework has to be there. All this has been articulated in that, how that regulatory framework, the system should work. So now here what we are saying is that the 6 thrust areas, which is we are going to work on, we have a plan up to 2030, which is very much a vital role will be played by the industry. And even we go up to the level of saying what is the institutional framework should be for implementing this. And we have given a deadline of setting up the institutional framework first quarter of next year. And it will say what is the combination governance of that. And there will be a vital role played from the industry, chambers, all these think tanks. Everybody will be very much part of it. And we will take the lead of taking to the next level. And we will make sure the implementation is done. And we have a short-term, mid-term, long-term kind of goals which is being set up. So we have a clear path. And even that specified the institutional framework, and going back to this first question of the digital ID, what we normally call it, how that should be get it in, how you should get it implemented, what is the time frames, etc. So we are looking at a very much of a holistic approach. We are looking at sector-wise like agriculture, healthcare, education, all that, right? And I'll take 1 minute, maybe touch upon one of the biggest highlights in my view was taken in probably a longest time from a budget point of view or proposal point of view, transformation which is proposed in the education sector. Right? This is, I think, a very big positive, and possibly this is the biggest chunk which is in a budget document I have seen in recent years. There was a separate education task force, which I was also part of that. President mentioned there were 25-member team worked on it. I was one of those 25 people, which is he led the team. And even we going up to the level of abolishing certain traditional mechanisms we have, including the University Grants Commission. We will have a new institute replacing that, how the private sector will come in, how the institutes will basically come in. So all these changes are coming in. With the interest of time, probably I'll stop at that time. There's a lot will be coming in time to come.
Thank you, Indiga, for summarizing the benefits. I think we have so many questions, all the questions, I think most of it has been addressed, but there are a couple pending, but we run out of time as well. We are at 10:30. Just one question for Dr. Kapila in the interest of a lot of people here. Electricity has been exempted from VAT. Is there any change to the status in the new budget proposal, if somebody has asked? That's for it's a yes or no answer. No, okay. So with that, we'll call it to close, and let me ask Nipuni to do the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Rajakaria, and thank you very much to our esteemed panelists. Unfortunately, not all of them could wait with us right to the end, but I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you have received some very important insights. So before we close, ladies and gentlemen, the panel discussion, I'd like to say that we would like to show our thanks and gratitude for their presence here today and their views. I'd like to invite on stage our managing partner, Mr. Priyanka Jayatilaka, to join Mr. Surendra Rajakaria. And ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to hand over these tokens of our appreciation. Please put your hands together for Dr. Kapila Senanayaka. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Prasanjit Vijayathilaka. Mr. Indikati Soiza. And Mr. Reyes Mueller. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for all our panelists. Thank you very much. Also our three panelists who unfortunately had to leave early. Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Mr. Hasita Premratna and Mr. Romal Kure, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jayatilaka. Thank you to our panelists. Mr. Rajakaria, can I ask you to remain on stage while our panelists take their seats in the audience?
No time.
They wish.
Go down. Give me additional.
And now I'd like to invite our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Suren Rajakaria, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I think we've run out of time, but I thought quickly we had a few action plans as well. On the tourism sector, Visit Sri Lanka is critical, is what Shiromal said. Agriculture, post-harvest management, exports, there were 5 areas which were identified by Hasita, which will be part of the action points, which we will communicate through KPMG. On the banking sector, we had migration from debt to equity and SOE reforms to be done on time. And also for the government to work on the fiscal policy. So these were a few action points which were identified. I'm really thankful to the panel and the presenters today. I would, Nishan Dimel for the excellent presentation, Suresh Pereira for summarizing the budget. I would also like to express my gratitude to all the clients who were here among your busy schedules. Our thanks also to Shangri-La, the events and operations team, Digital Content Private Limited, and DC Events, the event management company, for doing a wonderful job. And the media partners, MTV Channel and Daily FT. Thanks to all the organizing teams, KPMG Tax, Advisory, and the markets team for doing a wonderful job. And also, last but not least, Nipuni for comparing the show very well. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very big thank you for being here this morning. I hope you've enjoyed your morning here with us and that you are taking away some important insights. Once again, thank you very much from the KPMG team, and we hope it's a road to recovery for 2024.